Okay, so now we have a more general look at sponsorship, where it is now, where it might be going. We'll look at it from a business point of view, but also from a fan's point of view. I think a lot of fans around the world sometimes think that big sponsors are sidelining them because they just have more expenses, and their team seems to sometimes think about the Brazilian national team. It travels all over the world. It hardly plays in Brazil anymore. You see, the thing is, if a club like Barcelona can accept now a sponsor on its club shirt, you know how important sponsorship is. You guys surely all know the story of Barcelona. For more than 100 years, not any name on its shirt. And then it started paying UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Charity. Barca was paying UNICEF to have UNICEF there, but now Qatar Airways becomes the first official sponsor of the Barcelona famous Catalan shirt, after having had Qatar Foundation on it as well. So Marc, AUDRIT, Lourenço, BUSTANI, Sally Hancock, Iskandar, who you've already met, Magali Tenezes, and Lesa UKMAN, and I'll explain who they are in just a moment as I ask you just first of all a brief question about what you do. Now Marc, let's start with you. Actually, you know what, let's start with Barcelona because I've been talking about Barcelona. So Lesa UKMAN, you actually put the evaluation together for the UNICEF name to be across the Barcelona shirt. Just talk us briefly through that, Lesa.
So when they were negotiating, they were coming up with how do we price or value and how much should Barcelona pay UNICEF. So what we did was we looked at what's the future additional value to Barcelona when they sell to a commercial partner, as a result of having had UNICEF on their kit, and so that's how we came up with it. And beyond just the cash, it was a great thing for UNICEF at the time because it really helped them build their brand and make them a desired partner to many other organizations.
So by the way, ladies and gentlemen, you have the profiles of these speakers, but what really struck me about Lesa, who works for IEG, which provides sponsorship solutions to top brands, is that in 1982, Lesa launched the IEG sponsorship report. That presented the idea that businesses that make a positive impact and actually deepen bonds with stakeholders and the things that stakeholders particularly love, it makes a massive difference to the profit that those companies make compared to ones that don't engage in that kind of sponsorship of things that stakeholders love. And you can think, for me, stakeholder always means football fan or sports fan. It may mean something different to you business people, but to me it always means a fan. So Marc, what I really was so interested about you and your job at Western Union is the fact that you have this incredibly innovative sponsorship deal of the UEFA Europa League, which has begun this season. Explain to us about that, please. I've never heard of anything like this before.
Well, we're probably inspired by Spider-Man. You know, this guy once said that with great power comes great responsibility, and football is a very powerful tool. And we, from the day one, we kind of thought we just can't be another sponsor, you know. And it's interesting to think about the dozens, if not hundreds, of brands that are involved in football these days. And we kind of thought we have to find something different and legitimate. And the moment of epiphany came, you know, 3 years ago, the final in Romania, two Spanish teams, Atletico Madrid, Atletico Bilbao, playing versus each other, and 3 goals were scored. 2 by a Colombian, Falcao, and 1 by the Brazilian. And at the end of the game, actually, while the players did what we've seen, you know, all the times, I think in the World Cup, etc., they grab the flags from the country they come from and they celebrate. I think it's interesting to imagine that a Colombian guy in Romania winning a game, the first thing that comes to his mind is grab the flag of his country. And actually this is something we observe with our customers. You know, most of our customers are migrants, and they have what we call double belonging. You know, you live in a country for a certain amount of time, but there's still something of you that belongs to where you come from. And while this was the brilliant insight that came out of that is that what about, you know, good things happening on the European football pitches that would have an impact where the players are coming from. And think about it for a second. I think last season in the Europa League, there were over 100 different nationalities. People from Togo, from Mali, from China, from the Philippines, from all over the world. And we kind of thought, what about, you know, just transforming something that is happening on the pitch all the time, which is the most generous move on a football pitch, a pass. And interesting enough, and I said legitimate, I think in our business there's a sender and a receiver. I think with a pass is the exact same thing. And we kind of thought, what about if every single pass during every single game, and I can tell you that the Europa League season is a long one, 205 games. Every pass will create a day of education in countries where the players are coming from. And this is something we started to do with the UNICEF. And instantly, I think it's interesting because I think all brands are fighting these days for content and engagement. And in this case, I think we managed actually to create something that was appealing to the football fans because we're playing with a football currency, but also for the people who are living, you know, in the receiving end. And this is just a fascinating story, I think, and opening probably the doors to, you know, new visions. Because I think if there's one thing I may add, I think this is a big room, but there's a big elephant in this room, is that I think sports marketing is probably extremely complacent. And I really think that it's our role as brands and as sponsors actually to behave a bit more creatively and really bring back, you know, to communities and to people what actually they can get through sports.
So essentially, every time Xavi passes to Iniesta, a child gets education for one day. That is absolutely amazing. And just as innovative, I'm hoping Lourenço Bustani, CEO, global CEO and co-founder of Mandalah, which is described as a conscious innovation consultancy. I'm not totally sure I understand the phrase, Lourenço. Tell us more.
Sure. Thanks for asking. Essentially, when we talk about conscious innovation, we're referring to innovative ideas, whether products, services, processes, business models, or initiatives such as the one that was just described, that necessarily improve people's lives. And that can mean anything, really. It can mean making people feel more connected, healthier, happier, more informed, more engaged within their communities. So anything that necessarily leaves a positive residual for people's lives, we believe is innovative. If that's not happening, that's not something we want to be part of. We'd rather spend our energies doing something else.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, Western Union and the case that was just described. No, but it's wonderful because basically when you're able to look at things systemically, which is exactly what he did when he kind of contextualized the relationship that these athletes have with their home countries, you identify opportunities to create win-win situations. So you create one initiative that has a ripple effect think of it as a vitalic spiral of prosperity. So one thing that unleashes a different set of phenomena, and everyone is benefiting from that in perpetuity. That to me is conscious innovation.
Lourenço, thank you very much. Sally Hancock is from the United Kingdom, chair of the Women's Sport and Fitness Foundation. But the award that you received in 2013, when you were voted the UK Sponsorship Personality of the Year, Sally, that came in part because of the innovative and groundbreaking partnership that you put together between the Lloyds banking group, who you were working for at the time, and London 2012 Olympic Games. What was groundbreaking about that? What can we learn from that you did?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think for Lloyds, what was very different about that partnership was really twofold. One is that we were the first partner to become a sponsor of the London Olympic and Paralympic Games from a national partner. And also, we never really viewed it as a sports sponsorship. And my rationale is as follows, really. We knew that since we had become a partner 5 years out from the Games, that we needed to have a really clear strategy on what we would do to activate the Olympic and the Paralympic Games. Because as a national partner, we would never compete with the likes of the major worldwide top sponsors in terms of spend and investment. So we needed to identify what it was that would really make Lloyds stand apart from our fellow sponsors. And we realized that probably what Lloyds would be able to do that very few other sponsors could would be to take the Games to the people of the UK and take the Games out to communities everywhere. And so for the following 5 years, we activated every year and we created a program of events and activities that really resonated in every single village and town and community in the UK, which of course the majority of people would never make it to London to the Games. So to give you two examples of what we did, one was to become the national presenting partner of the Olympic Torch Relay, which took the Olympic flame all over Britain in the build-up to the Games. But further out than that, we also decided to become, we took the decision that we would not support and sponsor elite athletes individually. We would support up-and-coming and rising stars and the next generation of future sporting talent in Britain. And so we committed to sponsor 250 young athletes a year for 4 years in the build-up to the Games, sponsoring 1,000 athletes in total, of which a staggering 40 actually competed for Britain in the Games themselves, much to my surprise. And of course, many of them now will compete in Rio 2016 and in future events beyond. And all of them came from somewhere in the UK that we communicated to directly. So the innovation and the insight for us was about sport in a community, in communities, at a time when we were right in the thick of the banking crisis. And what we did needed to be credible, it needed to feel defendable, and it needed to be robust.
Sally, thank you very much. Iskandar, I'm going to skip you, and then I'm going to come back to you after I hear from Magali. Magali Tezinas, Managing Director of Sporsora, the French company. And could you just explain what Sporsora is, please, Magali?
Yes, thank you. Sporsora is a French organization gathering the main expert in sports marketing and sports business in France. So we have something like 175 companies, members of Sporsora, brands, marketing agencies, medias, universities, schools, business schools involved in sports. And the objective of Sporsora is to develop the economy of sports and the investment of brands in sports. So we are doing a lot of things, awards, marketing awards, conferences, workshops. And perhaps the fact I can point today, because we are talking about investment of brands in sponsorship, is we are just working with brands and right holders on the KPIs, the key performance indicators on sponsorship. And of course, we all knows that sport is an amazing and very powerful tool to create awareness, reputation, brand equity, brand experience, but we think in Sporsora that you can add some KPIs on the corporate social responsibility. And if you want to secure your investment in sport, when you are a brand, as you are challenged by other marketing tools, you can secure your investment finding new KPIs. And we can found a lot of KPIs within the CSR policy. When sports has to go beyond marketing departments in the company. Sports has to nurture the culture of the company, and sports practice in the company, or the sponsorship in the company can really feed the CSR policy. And I think, and the human resource also policy, it's an amazing tool, for example, to attract and retain talents, to foster the employees' commitment in the company, to develop the mixity and diversity policy. So there are a lot of examples, and I know, talking with Sally, that she did wonderful things with the Lloyds for their employees, and well, it's part of the KPIs you can find in sponsoring is about CSR, and it is a huge opportunity, I think, for sponsorship people, and we don't have to waste it, because if sports doesn't go in that way, or the other kind of art or culture will do it, and we shouldn't waste this opportunity.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the difficulties that sponsors face in terms of winning over the fans, and also the sponsor's relationship with the institution, whichever sporting institution that might be, that they have a relationship. Iskandar, yesterday I spoke to a young chap from Egypt who left his job as an investment banker, and I won't mention his name because he may not want to be made public. He set up street football in Egypt. He said the McDonald's have come to him and offered him millions. Coca-Cola have come up to him and offered him millions. He says he doesn't want them to control his organization. How difficult do you find it sometimes as General Motors, this behemoth of a company, to be able to convince smaller entities that you don't want to completely control them, you want to work with them?
Sure. So let's say in the case with One World Football project, what we do is we make sure that at the end of the day, it's a win-win strategy. That you know, all the stakeholders do understand what they want to accomplish, and then from there we just work together, you know, to make sure that you integrate and marry and, you know, get a common goal. Otherwise, it's difficult because, you know, if one's a profit making, another's not, then, you know, there lies the difference.
Absolutely. Lourenço, you were advising Nike and their sponsorship deals before the Football World Cup this year. Were there some problems there because of the relationship between the fans and Nike? You think back to the 1998 World Cup final, there were all these conspiracy theories that Nike forced Ronaldo to play the final, that Nike is seen as Carioca or Paulista, but not Carioca. Paulista meaning from Sao Paulo, Carioca meaning from Rio.
Sure. Well, just to be clear, I didn't advise them on their sponsorships. I advised them in terms of how they would enter the market of Rio de Janeiro, which is the backdrop for the World Cup that just took place in the Olympics in 2016. And it's because the brand was historically so from Sao Paulo and not from Rio that they needed to exercise special care in order to legitimize themselves as a brand in a city that's very distinct, that has many cultural peculiarities. And in 2010, when this work started, rather than go to the default mode of telling Nike to do things as they usually do, which is go into a market and saturate the city with media and make their presence known, make their brand visible, we told them to perhaps take a step back and sensitize themselves regarding the very particular moment that the city was going through. And in 2010, the city was undergoing some dramatic pacification initiatives. Now understand, Rio de Janeiro has historically been a very unsafe city, which means that people would never really leave their neighborhoods. So a very segregated city. And in 2010, because of the city's municipal efforts to pacify the shanty towns, the favelas around town, people were starting to migrate from one neighborhood to the other. And with that, you have all the cultural exchange that happens very naturally when people cross-pollinate. And so what we told Nike is to observe that and to understand how they could be part of that moment and how they can foment urban integration through sport. So rather than do a top-down approach and a very aggressive way, to do a bottom-up approach, infusing the city with the attributes related to its brand, but leveraging its assets by bringing people together, regardless of their age and socioeconomic background, through sport, but in the name of something bigger, which is urban integration, which is what you would expect to see in any big city like Rio de Janeiro. And so that vision translated into mapping out the different neighborhoods of the city, and in one part of town, taking over abandoned fields and creating a youth training center for youth from any part of town, refurbishing skate ramps in another part of town, doing a surf center for surfers in another part of town, creating a championship between low-income communities, between the favelas, and a number of other different initiatives. And the hypothesis behind this is that when you get involved in the social fabric of a city, being a brand, you generate empathy with people, true, authentic empathy, because you're participating in upgrading their quality of life. That empathy over time will translate into brand preference. Brand preference over time translates into brand loyalty. Brand loyalty translates into sales, and sales translates into profit. But profit is the natural consequence of something much bigger, much more long-lasting, much more perennial, and much more real, essentially. So that was kind of what happened, and in a very short period of time, a brand that was completely inaccessible and had no connection with residents of Rio, the Cariocas as we call them, suddenly had the largest share of heart for sportswear among the city's residents.
Sally, how important now with the attention that sports institutions, clubs, teams, whatever, get from the media, is it for a sponsor to have some sort of ethics clause in the deal that they sign with that sporting institution? You know, you think Tiger Woods and the sponsors that he lost after his personal problems. The president of the US Professional Golfers Association just recently dismissed for calling in a tweet Ian Poulter, the British golfer, a little girl. Is there a danger there for sponsors that their name gets associated with some sort of sexist, racist, or negative comment?
I think there are slightly two different points to the question in some respects. Yes, of course, there should be an ethics clause in a contract. You should have the opportunity, if it's clearly apparent that the brand value of your partnership is being diminished because of the bad behaviour of your sponsored party. But equally, I do think that there are plenty of examples of sponsors who really don't understand the risk they go into when they become a sponsor. So, you know, if you invest your money in single athletes, you must know that there's an inherent risk in doing so, as opposed to supporting a much broader group of athletes. For example, you should be very prepared all the way through your agreement for the mitigation if something goes wrong, and be prepared to respond. And I am occasionally surprised, you know, we've seen that a little bit with FIFA over the last 12 months or so, that one or two sponsors haven't spoken out more about the fact that, you know, we are in some tough times with FIFA, and actually I'm surprised they haven't, when asked, said, yes, we are looking for a solution, we are looking for some transparency, and we're looking for some answers. Instead they stay quiet, and I find that a little unusual.
Lisa.
I just read right before we came out that Emirates is dropping FIFA as a result of what's been going on. We certainly saw with NFL there was some issues around players hitting wives, girlfriends, and some of the sponsors took the approach of promoting initiatives around domestic violence, the NFL partners. Many of them already had initiatives going, and so that was also a very sort of counterintuitive way to approach it. But I just want to say one more thing. I think this idea that brands, you know, need to embed social responsibility, or what I call social opportunity, into their partnerships, I think that's pretty well, at least in some markets, understood, because it gives a much higher return on investment. So it's enlightened self-interest, and there are risks when you associate with whether it's an athlete or a federation or a team or a league, but the potential upside is something that you pretty much don't find with any other marketing vehicle. So, you know, companies are willing.
Sally?
But the flip side to that, I think, is that, certainly from my experience in London 2012, was that maybe this was just specifically around Olympic and Paralympic Games, or more so the Olympics. But there were times when we as sponsors felt like we were being positioned as the necessary evil. Mm-hmm. You know, that we were there because we needed the money, you know, without the sponsors, we wouldn't be able to stage the event. But not recognizing the real value that sponsors bring. So we would be blamed for every query about ambush, every time we raised a red flag about the use of the rings. You know, we were being over-restrictive in on our clauses about not allowing anyone else to use anything other than a Visa card, etc., etc. And I think we do have some work to do as an industry to get away from this kind of uneasy situation that sort of positions sponsors as somehow taking and not giving back. That has to change.
Marc?
It reminds me something we saw when we were, you know, exploring what we would do. It's a mapping, actually, what's done in the UK, asking football fans to map brands and really start seeing, and it started with the core, actually the brands that are really genuine to the sport. And as you can imagine, in the very core, you have the Nike and Adidas of this world, and that's it. And then the further you go, I think you start losing, you know, genuinity. And it's interesting because the last circle is called brands exploiting footballs. And I think that's where you start seeing brands that are big ones, you know. I think, and to the point that was made, I think it's important that brands are really aware of what they can and can't do. Because consumers, fans, and that's, I think, ultimately a good news, are a lot more sophisticated and educated and have this sort of bullshit detector always on. And I think they can read the strategies, and I think if it doesn't fit, they see it, and then they can amplify through social media.
Magali, okay, you say your point and then I'll ask you a follow-up question.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say that when you have a risk like that, of course you have risk, but if you really build very the link with your communities, the risk is lower. And for example, for football teams, it's really important, and it's what they wonderfully do in UK, the link they have with their local communities. You have less risk if you are able to create specific link on a social with social initiatives, and the risk is lower. In France, we were just talking about that. There is an amazing initiative of the different governing bodies in football, in professional footballs. They are just organizing in all the football clubs forum for employed people. They call that supporters de l'emploi, so the employment people meet companies in the stadiums. And I think it's a very, very good initiative to really create very strong link between professional football club and the communities. So you have risk, but if you are able to create that kind of links with your communities, you're better prepared to assume the risk.
Can I ask you about the empirical evidence, the hard cash and the results that are coming back to the sponsors in terms of selling their products? Is there evidence that it increases the sales if you have your name across a sporting event? Magali?
It's difficult to give you to give you some figures, but of course there is a huge return of investment if it's the question. So and you said if you have additionally a social or corporate social responsibility action or initiative, the return of investment is better, because it's all about emotion. Sport is all about emotion, link between the fans, the consumers, the communities. So the better you do with emotional aspect, the better return on investment you have. So it's difficult because you have so many KPIs you can check. So, but of course, and it's a big challenge for sponsorship just to find the good KPI.
Okay, just a couple of minutes to go, Lourenço.
Yeah. So on that question, I think if you're sponsoring a very well-known football club, for example, obviously you have brand awareness, and to a certain extent brand awareness will drive revenues. But I think the big question is, how much more could you have driven in terms of revenues if you were a truly engaged brand, right? I feel like brand awareness is so 20th century. Just because you know a brand doesn't really mean you have a strong connection that you're an evangelist of that brand. And I feel that if you're just focused on brand awareness, then your ROI is going to be very limited. That brands should really go beyond that, especially since putting your brand on a uniform is just piggybacking or bandwagging on someone else's success, right? What do you stand for? What are you genuinely doing that's transforming lives? I think that's the question. That's the standard to which we should be subjecting these brands.
But that's exactly what all the fans are asking as well. They're asking exactly that question. Mohammed, let me probably end with you. Okay, the Manchester United deal, that huge deal, 560 million, 559 million over 7 seasons. Yep. How important is it to General Motors that United keep winning? At the moment, they're playing terrible football. Does it devalue the money that, well, obviously GM still has to give the money, but does it devalue the brand of that sign on the shirt?
I mean, firstly, everybody wants to win. Nobody wants to lose. But I think the value of the investment is beyond that. Winning a game, drawing or losing. It's about, I think, what the brand wants to do. So in our case, for Chevrolet, we would like the brand is strong in the US, but it's still picking up in other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, in China, and that's why we see the partnership with Manchester United. They have the same vision. So to your point, yes, today the team is top, I guess, yeah, some hits, some misses, but we are confident over the long term with that same mindset. We can grow together for the brand.
The best man at my wedding is a Manchester United season ticket holder. In the days when they were sponsored by Sharp, He sold his, well, he threw away his JVC video recorder and bought a Sharp. Incredible. He is definitely, undoubtedly unhinged in the way he supports Manchester United. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed, the Transforming Sponsorship panel. Thank you.